3 seconds before the auctioneer's gavel fell on lot 18, and a battle-scarred Belgian Malinois was sold to a private security firm for $8,000, Audra Keene pressed a crumpled $50 money order against her chest and walked straight onto the auction floor. What happened next stopped every person in Warehouse 7 cold. The October air in Jacksonville, North Carolina, carried the particular dampness of a coastal autumn. Salt from the Atlantic layered over diesel exhaust and cut grass from the base's outlying fields. Audra had driven 4 hours from Raleigh in a car whose check engine light had been on since July, surviving on gas station coffee and the kind of quiet that settles over a person who has already lost the thing they were most afraid of losing. She wore a grey fleece pullover with Camp Lejeune Family Services embroidered on the left breast. Rafe had brought it home from a volunteer fair 3 years ago. It was 2 sizes too large, and she had never returned it. Staff Sergeant Rafael Keene had been the kind of man who could walk into any room and make every person in it feel like they were the most important one there. Audra had fallen in love with him at a 4th of July cookout at her cousin's house in Greenville when he'd spent 45 minutes crouched on the lawn teaching her 7-year-old nephew how to throw a spiral, ruining the knees of his good genes without a second thought. That was Rafe, always crouched down to someone's level, always paying attention to the thing that mattered. For the last 5 years of his career with the 2nd Marine Division, the thing that mattered most to Rafe, aside from Audra, was a 78-pound Belgian Malinois named Dagger. Dagger was a dual-purpose military working dog, IED detection and apprehension trained, the product of thousands of hours of specialized conditioning and an instinct for threat assessment that bordered on the supernatural. In the field, he was a precision instrument, focused, relentless, completely devoted to the Marine on the other end of his lead. At home on base, he was something else entirely. During the 2 weeks every year when Rafe managed to bring him stateside for a veterinary rotation, Dagger would press his entire 78 pounds against Audra's legs while she worked on the couch, snoring with his nose tucked under her knee, perfectly at peace. Rafe used to say the dog had 2 modes, warfighter and golden retriever. Rafe said a lot of things Audra still turned over in her mind at 2 in the morning. On a Tuesday in March, a convoy from Rafe's unit was moving through the Sangin district of Helmand Province when a roadside IED detonated beneath the lead vehicle. The secondary device, the one planted specifically to catch the response team, went off 40 seconds later. According to the official casualty report, Staff Sergeant Rafael Keene died from blast injuries sustained while pulling 2 Marines from the wreckage of the primary vehicle. He was 31 years old. He had been scheduled to rotate home in 6 weeks. Dagger had been in the rear vehicle. He had survived. The dog had been loaded onto the medevac alongside the wounded, and by every account from Rafe's surviving squadmates, it had taken 3 Marines and a sedative to keep the Malinois from throwing himself off the helicopter ramp trying to get back to the kill zone. They hadn't told Audra that part in the official notification. She found it in a text from Corporal Wen Chow. Rafe's youngest squadmate, one of the men Rafe had pulled from the burning vehicle, sent 6 weeks after the funeral in the middle of the night. I thought you should know. He didn't leave Rafe. Not until they made him. Audra had sat on the bathroom floor with her back against the tub and read that text until the phone screen went dark. The Marine Corps kept Dagger at the kennels at Camp Lejeune during his medical evaluation and mandatory behavioral assessment. Audra filed the request to adopt him the same week she filed the paperwork for Rafe's life insurance claim. It was the kind of thing that made sense deep in the gut, a level of certainty that didn't require logic. Rafe's dog belonged with Rafe's family. That was the whole of it. Except Dagger was not the same dog he had been. The kennel supervisor, Sergeant Doris Alt, called Audra personally to explain the situation. Dagger had stopped eating within 4 days of returning stateside. He had destroyed the interior of 2 separate holding runs. He had bitten a kennel technician through a leather glove, severely enough to require stitches. When anyone in Marine Corps utilities approached his kennel, the dog went into a territorial frenzy that left him shaking and panting for hours afterward, too spent to eat, even when they managed to calm him. The base veterinarian, after 8 weeks of behavioral intervention and anti-anxiety medication that produced no lasting results, issued the evaluation with clinical precision: MWD Dagger, non-adoptable, risk classification, severe, disposition, reassignment or controlled sale. The letter denying Audra's adoption request arrived on a Wednesday. It was polite, thorough, and completely devastating. She sat with it at the kitchen table for a long time. The house was very quiet. It had been very quiet for 4 months. Then she opened the drawer where she kept the things she couldn't look at directly: the folded flag from the funeral, Rafe's last letter, and a money order for $50 he had mailed in an envelope 3 weeks before he died. The note attached read, in his blocky handwriting, "For something fun, Audra Bird. Not bills, not savings, something purely, stubbornly fun. I mean it, I will know." She had never cashed it. She folded the money order into the breast pocket of the fleece and started making calls to find out exactly when and where the auction for MWD Lot 18 was being held. Warehouse 7 at the Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune Logistics Annex was a low-slung metal building that smelled of motor oil, rust, and the specific institutional cold of government concrete that never fully warms regardless of the season. By 9 o'clock on auction morning, the folding chairs in the bidder section were occupied by the kind of men who wore tactical watches as a personality statement: private security executives, corporate risk consultants, 2 county sheriffs looking for a discounted K9 to shore up under-budgeted departments. At the front of the room, behind a standard issue table draped in blue cloth, stood the property disposal officer, a lean, efficient retired chief warrant officer named Phil Calder, who ran surplus auctions with the brisk authority of someone who genuinely did not want to be at work before noon. Beside him, on a rolling whiteboard, was the day's lot list. Lot 18 was circled in red marker. Audra had arrived 45 minutes early and positioned herself near the side door. She had no bidder registration number. She had not gone through the check-in table. The security guard at the entrance had waved her through, after a glance at her military-dependent ID, without looking at it closely, and she had not corrected his assumption about her purpose there. She could hear Dagger before she could see him. The sound came from a staging area behind a heavy partition at the back of the building. Not barking, but something lower, a sustained, guttural vocalization that vibrated in the chest rather than the ears. It was the sound of an animal in unrelenting distress, and it had been going on, according to the expression of the kennel technician, standing near the partition door, since approximately 4 in the morning. There were 7 other military working dogs in crates along the north wall, waiting for their own lots. All of them were restless in response to Dagger's state. The air in Warehouse 7 had the particular compressed tension of a room full of stressed animals and impatient men. The auction moved efficiently through the early lots. Decommissioned communications equipment, a surplus Humvee with a cracked windshield, 2 trained patrol dogs that went to a county sheriff's department within 6 bids each. Calder moved through them with practiced speed, reading his clipboard with the flat cadence of a man reciting a grocery list. Then, Lot 18, military working dog, Belgian Malinois, male, 7 years, dual purpose, IED detection and patrol apprehension, combat veteran. Calder paused, glancing at the sheet. Current behavioral classification, high risk. Prospective handlers are advised this animal has demonstrated significant aggression toward uniformed personnel and will require specialized management. He is not suitable for civilian placement. Bidding opens at $2,000. The partition door opened. 2 handlers came through first, each holding a heavy-duty restraint lead clipped to a catch pole. They were followed by Dagger. Audra's breath left her completely. She had seen photographs, the ones Rafe had texted her over the years, Dagger mid-stride on a training field, or flopped against Rafe's boot somewhere in a forward operating base, looking more like a 60-pound puddle than a precision military asset. The dog in those photographs had clear, alert eyes and a coat that shone even in bad light. This dog looked carved from tension. His ribs were faintly visible beneath fur that had gone dull. His ears were pinned so flat they'd all but disappeared. His eyes, dark, deep-set, bloodshot at the rims, moved over the crowd with the rapid assessment of an animal that had decided every person in the room was a threat and was calculating only the order. He moved sideways against the restraints, a sound grinding in his chest that made the sheriffs in the front row unconsciously shift their chairs back. 2,000. One of the county sheriffs raised his placard, then seemed to reconsider as Dagger lunged against the catch poles. From the second row, a man in a charcoal blazer over a dark polo shirt raised 2 fingers. He had the kind of stillness that comes not from calm, but from a long history of controlled aggression. His name badge read Iron Veil Defense, Frey D. 4,500, Desmond Frey said, without inflection. 4,500 to Ironville. Calder nodded. Do I hear 5? 5,000, the sheriff said, clearly not wanting to but unable to stop himself. 6, Frey said immediately, checking something on his phone. 6,000 to Ironville. Do I hear 7? 7, a grey-haired man at the back called the logo of a private maritime security company on his vest. 8 flat, final. Frey didn't look up from his phone. 8,000 to Ironville Defense. Calder raised his gavel, going once. Audra Keene walked onto the auction floor. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She had spent 4 months moving through the world at a careful, controlled pace because she had learned that if she slowed down enough, she could keep herself from falling apart completely, and this was no different. She walked down the center of the room, her hands at her sides, the Camp Lejeune fleece zipped to her chin, until she was standing 12 feet from a 78-pound dog who had not been calm in 8 weeks. The murmur went through the room immediately. One of the handlers snapped, "Ma'am, you need to step back. This animal is..." Audra reached into her breast pocket. She took out the $50 money order. It was folded in thirds, slightly soft at the creases from how many times she had unfolded and refolded it in the parking lot that morning. Steeling herself, she held it up with one hand, her arms straight. With her other hand, she pressed 3 fingers flat against the side of her thigh. The hand signal, the one she'd seen Rafe use 100 times on shaky video calls from 5,000 miles away, the one that meant at ease, the one that meant I've got you, the one she had practiced in a parking lot 40 minutes ago because she was terrified she would forget it under pressure. Dagger froze. Not gradually, not winding down, between one stride and the next, as if something had cut a wire inside him. The catch poles went slack. Both handlers stumbled forward half a step from the sudden absence of resistance. "I bid $50, Audra said. Her voice was not loud, but Warehouse 7 was, in that moment, completely silent, and in that silence her voice arrived like something physical. A sound came from Desmond Frey that was approximately a short laugh, except it didn't sound like amusement. It sounded like surprise breaking through before he could stop it. His name was Staff Sergeant Rafael Keene, Audra said. Her voice had developed a tremor she could feel, but couldn't stop. She kept her hand signal pressed against her thigh. She kept her eyes on Dagger. He brought this dog home twice in 5 years. Both times, Dagger slept on our kitchen floor because he wouldn't go in the bedroom. And Rafe used to leave the television on low for him because Rafe said the silence made him anxious. She paused. I think the silence still makes him anxious. I think a lot of things make him anxious now. Another pause. I understand that completely. $50. That's what I have that was his. Dagger had been motionless since she raised the money order. Now, with the painstaking caution of an animal relearning something it believed it had lost permanently, he lowered his nose to the warehouse floor and began to move toward her. The catch poles dragged on the concrete. The handlers let them. From the north wall, the 7 dogs in their crates went silent. Not one at a time. Between one breath and the next, as if a signal had passed through the air on a frequency no human instrument could measure, the barking and pacing and frantic crate throwing stopped. In the stillness that followed, Audra became aware that every dog in the row had repositioned itself. 7 animals in 7 separate crates, sitting perfectly upright, ears at full forward, chests squared, every one of them facing the center of the room. Facing her. Calder had lowered his gavel to his side. His mouth was slightly open. He had run property disposal auctions for 11 years and had never once suspended a lot mid-bid, and he found himself completely unable to explain, even to himself, why his hand would not move right now. Dagger reached her. He pressed his muzzle, still fitted with a basket muzzle that no one had moved to remove, directly into the center of her sternum. Audra dropped to her knees on the concrete and put both arms around his neck, and the dog made a sound, high and broken and entirely at odds with his 78 pounds and his fearsome history, that made at least 2 men in the room look sharply at the ceiling. "I know," Audra said into his fur. Her voice had gone very small. "I know, me too." Desmond Frey had not moved from the second row. He was no longer checking his phone. His arms were at his sides, and his expression had lost its boardroom precision entirely. He looked for a long moment, like a man who had stepped into a room he did not expect. Then he picked up his bidder placard. Not to raise it, he folded it in half and set it down on the chair beside him. He walked onto the floor. Calder's hand on his gavel tensed. "Mr. Frey." "Hold the lot," Frey said. It was not a request. He stopped a few feet from Audra and the dog. He didn't crouch. He stood with his hands loosely at his sides, the body language of a man deliberately making himself non-threatening. A posture that did not come naturally to him and which he performed with the concentrated effort of a skill recently remembered. "Staff Sergeant Keene," Frey said. "2nd Marine Division, Helmand Province, March." Audra looked up at him with Dagger still pressed against her. Frey reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and took out a photograph, printed on standard paper, worn soft at the fold. A printout, not a developed photo. He held it out to her. It was a photograph of a Marine shaking hands with a civilian in a hospital corridor. The Marine was thinner than she remembered, and the lighting was poor, and there were IV lines still visible on the civilian's arm. But she recognized the set of Rafe's shoulders the way you recognize a voice in a crowd. "My son was in the vehicle your husband pulled from," Frey said. He kept his voice level with visible effort. "Lance Corporal Tyler Frey. He's been at Bethesda for 3 months. He'll walk with a limp for the rest of his life, but he will walk." A pause. "Tyler told me everything he could remember. Your husband went back to that vehicle twice. The second time, the secondary device." He stopped, started again. "I've been trying to find your husband's family since Tyler was well enough to talk." The room was absolutely still. Frey reached into his other pocket and set a business card and a handwritten receipt on the floor in front of Audra. "Iron Vale Defense letterhead. Iron Vale is withdrawing its bid on Lot 18. His voice had gone quiet, stripped of professional gloss. "I am purchasing this animal as a private individual. Full transfer of ownership, including all training records and medical files, to Mrs. Audra Keene. I'll cover whatever fees the base requires to process it." He looked at Calder. "Is that legal?" Calder looked at the receipt. He looked at Frey. He looked at the 7 dogs sitting in crisp, silent attention along the north wall. He cleared his throat. "Yes, sir, that is legal." "Then let's close it." Frey looked back at Audra, and his voice dropped to something barely meant for the room at all. "Keep your $50, Mrs. Keene. Consider the rest a debt your husband is never going to let me stop paying." The warehouse came apart. It came apart the way something under pressure does. Not gently, but all at once, noise flooding back in from every direction. Men who had been staring at the floor for the last 2 minutes suddenly clapping hands against the metal barricades. A sound like rolling thunder through the building. Calder raised his gavel and brought it down, and through all of it Dagger did not move from Audra's arms. The first 2 weeks at the house in Raleigh were not easy. Audra had known they wouldn't be. She had read everything she could find about dogs with combat-related PTSD. The hypervigilance, the noise sensitivity, the way any sudden movement in the peripheral could send a trained animal back inside a moment that no longer existed in the external world, but lived on in some interior one. She moved the furniture to give Dagger clear sightlines to every door. She stopped using the television. She started leaving Rafe's old PT shirts in a pile on the floor near the back door, where Dagger had chosen on his first night to sleep. He didn't come inside for 4 days. He patrolled the backyard in loops she watched from the kitchen window, fence line, door, wearing a track in the grass that made her chest ache. She didn't force it. She sat on the back step with coffee that went cold and read aloud from whatever she had on hand, a nursing journal, a library novel, once a long magazine piece about migratory birds, and let him run his loops. On the 3rd night he slowed down and came close enough to lie in the grass 6 feet from where she sat. On the 9th day he came inside. He didn't go to the bedroom. He went to the kitchen and lay down where the PT shirts were piled, circled twice, and went to sleep with his chin on Rafe's sleeve. Progress arrived in increments so small they were almost invisible. He began eating on a regular schedule. He began allowing Audra to scratch behind his ears without flinching. He began moving through the house with something that was not ease exactly, but was the absence of constant terror, which was its own kind of peace. The moment Audra knew, for certain, that they were going to be all right came on a Tuesday night in December, when the neighbors set off leftover fireworks from a roll they'd had in the garage since the 4th. The first bang hit, and she was already moving for the back door, her heart in her throat, bracing for the sound of Dagger throwing himself against the walls. She found him sitting at the kitchen window, watching the light in the sky with his ears pricked forward. Interested. Not afraid. He looked at her when she came in, his tail, a tail she had never once seen move in their 9 weeks together, swept once across the tile floor. Audra sat down on the kitchen tile. Dagger climbed into her lap, all 78 pounds of him, settling his full weight across her legs, with the boneless confidence of an animal who has decided definitively where he belongs. She sat on the kitchen floor with a military working dog in her lap, and outside the fireworks cracked the December sky open, and she laughed for the first time in 8 months, which turned, the way these things often do, into something that was not exactly laughing, and Dagger stayed exactly where he was through all of it, because he had decided this was his post now, and he was not leaving it. 6 months after the auction, on the 1st day of April, a cold, bright Wednesday with high clouds that made the sky look impossibly wide, Audra loaded Dagger into the back seat of her car and drove north to a traveling installation honoring Marine Corps working dogs that had opened at a veterans museum in Columbus, Ohio. It had not been a precisely planned destination. She had read about the installation online, booked a hotel, and told herself it was a reasonable road trip. She did not examine the reasoning too closely. The museum was quiet on a weekday morning. Dagger moved at her side with the focused, contained alertness of a dog, aware he was in a public space. Leash loose, reading Audra's pace without prompting, so different from the warehouse that the museum's greeting volunteer had simply looked at them both and said, quietly, "Beautiful dog," with the sincerity of someone who meant more than the words. They moved through the installation room by room. Photographs, unit citations, retired gear mounted on fabric-covered panels. Dagger was attentive but calm. He paused at certain photographs the way dogs do, scenting something the image carried that no human instrument could access, and moved on. At the far end, in a smaller room off the main corridor, there was a memorial wall. The names of military working dogs killed in action, arranged by branch and year, and beside each name the name of the handler. Dagger stopped 6 feet from the wall. His ears went fully forward. His tail stilled. He stood motionless for a long moment, then took 3 slow, deliberate steps forward and sat, his right paw lifted off the floor and pressed flat against the base of the wall, against the panel that held the names from Helmand Province, the year Rafe died. Audra read the panel. She found Rafe's unit designation. Below it, the roster from that march. 2 military working dogs had been lost in Helmand that month. Not Dagger, who had survived, but a dog named Odin, handled by Corporal Wen Chao. She had not known this. It had not been in any of the official communications she'd received. She knew Wen Chao's name from the text he had sent her the night she sat on the bathroom floor. She had not known he had lost his dog in the same action that took Rafe. Odin's name was directly beneath Rafe's on the panel. Dagger's paw was pressed against both of them. Audra stood in the quiet of that room and understood, with the particular clarity that only arrives when you stop trying to understand something and simply let it be true, that Dagger had not only mourned Rafe. He had mourned all of them, the whole of that morning in the Sangin district. The vehicle, the blast, the men who went, and the men who didn't come back. He had carried it the way soldiers carry things, which is to say not visibly, and not without cost, and never entirely alone. She knelt beside him. She did not say anything. There was nothing adequate to say. After a long time, Dagger turned away from the wall. He looked at Audra with the clear, settled attention she had come to recognize as his baseline in the months they'd shared. The look that meant "I see you." The look that meant "I'm here." And then he stood and leaned his full weight against her side. They stayed like that in the quiet room while outside the Ohio sky threw cold spring light through high windows, and the names on the wall held still. Rafe Keene had served with precision and devotion, and the particular kind of courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside, because it looks too much like ordinary decency. He had left behind a wife who was still learning how to hold the silence he'd left in every room, and a dog who had crossed the worst threshold an animal can cross, and come out the other side of it, not broken, but rebuilt. Rebuilt around a new center, a new post, a new mission. The $50 money order was still in Audra's coat pocket. She had never cashed it. She did not think she ever would. Some debts are not meant to be settled. Some are meant to be carried, carefully, the way you carry the things that matter, not as weight, but as proof that what you held was real and heavy and worth every mile of the road that brought you here.